There is a moment in every person's life when someone they love looks them dead in the eye and tells them, with absolute certainty, that they are nothing. Not with a shout, not with a slap, but with something far more devastating, a laugh, not the kind that fills a room with warmth. Not the kind you share over dinner when the wine is good and the night is long and the people you love are sitting close. No, this was the kind of laugh that strips a person down to the bone. The kind that says, I see you completely. And what I see is worthless. Claire Donovan heard that laugh on a Tuesday evening in March. Standing in the kitchen of the home she had spent 3 years making beautiful, her hands resting on the swell of her pregnant belly, her voice trembling but her eyes completely still. She had just told her husband, Marcus, that if he walked out that door, she would be fine. That she would survive. That she would figure it out on her own. And Marcus Hargrove, successful, polished, arrogant in the particular way that only men who have never truly struggled can be, tilted his head back and laughed. A long, slow, deeply satisfied laugh, like she had just told the funniest joke he'd ever heard. You'll be fine, he repeated, setting his keys on the marble counter with a sharp little click. Claire, sweetheart, you can barely keep a houseplant alive. You haven't worked in 2 years. You're 6 months pregnant, and you've never once in your life had an original idea that didn't come from a Pinterest board. He smiled then, that charming, practiced smile that had once made her fall in love with him. But, sure, you'll be fine. He picked his keys back up. He walked out the door, and Claire stood in that kitchen, alone. The only sound, the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the soft, steady rhythm of the life growing inside. Her and she made herself a promise. Not a dramatic one, not a loud one, no fists raised to the heavens, no tearful declarations. Just a quiet, bone-deep, unshakable promise she made to herself and to the baby she hadn't yet met. Watch me, now. I want you to stay with me here, because this is not just a story about a woman who got even dissed. This is a story about what happens when someone underestimates the wrong person at exactly the wrong moment. It's a story about the particular kind of strength that only emerges from the deepest kind of pain. And it is a story about karma, the slow, patient, and inevitable kind that doesn't announce itself until the moment it arrives. And then it arrives like a thunderstorm. So let's go back to the beginning, because to understand what Claire built, you first have to understand what she survived. Claire had grown up in a modest neighborhood in Columbus, Ohio, the eldest daughter of a high school art teacher and a woman who worked 2 jobs and still found time to make pancakes from scratch every Sunday morning. Her childhood wasn't wealthy, but it was rich in a way that mattered. It was full of warmth and creativity and the kind of unconditional love that teaches a child they are enough, exactly as they are. She was the kind of girl who noticed things. The way the light changed in a room when the season shifted. The way a well-designed object could make an ordinary task feel like a pleasure. She had her mother's quiet warmth and her father's artistic eye, and from a very young age she understood, in that instinctive, wordless way that some people just do, that design was not decoration, it was communication. It was the silent language that shapes how people feel in a space without ever knowing why. She went to college on a partial scholarship, studying interior architecture and design, and she was brilliant at it. Not in a flashy, look-at-me way, but in the quiet way that makes professors stop and stand in front of your work for a long time without saying anything. She had 3 job offers before she graduated. She turned down 2 of them. The third was a mid-level position at a boutique design firm in Chicago. Small, respected, beautifully run by a woman named Harriet Say, who had been designing spaces for 30 years and had the kind of reputation that doesn't require a big advertising budget. Claire loved it there. She arrived early and stayed late. She brought in clients the firm had never been able to attract before, because she had something that couldn't be taught. She had the ability to listen to what a person wasn't saying, and translate it into something physical and beautiful and completely, perfectly. As she met Marcus at a client dinner in her 2nd year at the firm, he walked in wearing a suit that cost more than her monthly rent and carrying himself with the easy, effortless confidence of a man who had never once doubted his right to be in any room he entered. He was the kind of handsome that photographs well, sharp jaw, dark eyes, broad shoulders, and he had a way of focusing all of his attention on you when he spoke, like you were the most interesting person in the world, like everything else. In the room had simply stopped, Martitrian. It was a performance. She would understand later. But at 27, she had no way of knowing that. He courted her with a patience and elegance that felt, at the time, like reverence. Long dinners, handwritten notes, a weekend trip to Barcelona where they ate seafood on a terrace overlooking the sea, and he held her hand across the table and told her she was the most genuinely interesting woman he had ever met. She believed him. Why wouldn't she? He said it like he meant it. And perhaps, in that early season of admiration, before she became familiar to him, before she became his, perhaps he did. They married after 2 years. A beautiful, tasteful wedding that Claire designed herself. Every detail thoughtful and intentional and deeply personal, her mother cried. Her father danced. Her friends from the firm gave a speech that made the entire room laugh and then go quiet with something that felt like all. Marcus's family sat at their table with polite, measured smiles and a particular stiffness of people who had agreed to a thing they weren't entirely certain about. His mother, Vivian Hargrove, was a woman who wore her wealth the way some people wear armor visibly, at all times, as both shield and weapon. She had soft silver hair and cold blue eyes and the kind of immaculate posture that comes from a lifetime of being told that how you appear is what you are. She had kissed Claire's cheek at the wedding and said, "What a sweet little ceremony," and those 4 words contained an entire essay on her feelings about the woman her son had chosen. From the beginning, Vivian made her position clear, not loudly, not crudely, but with a kind of surgical precision that leaves no fingerprints. She forgot to include Claire in family emails about holiday plans. She referred to Claire's design work as decorating, the word landing with just enough lightness to make it impossible to object without sounding insensitive. She told Marquis, in Claire's presence, that he worked so hard, that he deserved more ease in his home life, that a wife's most important role was to be a refuge from the storm, not another source of turbulence. And Marcus listened. That was the thing Claire had not seen coming. She had thought his mother's opinion was simply background noise, something he tolerated and privately dismissed. She had not understood, not yet, that Marcus did not have his own opinions about his wife. He had his mother's opinions, dressed up in his own voice. The first year of their marriage was not unhappy. She is honest enough with herself to say that there were good months. There were mornings in their light-filled apartment when everything felt exactly as she had imagined. He made her coffee the way she liked it without being asked. She learned which of his silences meant tired and which meant troubled. They were building something, she believed, a life, a shared language, a home in the truest sense of the word. But things shifted, as things do, not in one dramatic moment but in the slow accumulation of small ones. He started coming home later, not dramatically, suspiciously late at first, just 30 minutes here, an hour there. He started talking about his work in a way that excluded her, using jargon and references she didn't know, and then, when she asked for clarification, smiling, that smile, the one that said he found her ignorance charming in the way. You find a child's misunderstanding of the world charming, endearing, but irrelevant. He started comparing her to his colleague, a sharp, high-achieving woman named Diana Cho who worked at his private equity firm and wore her intelligence like a weapon. Diana had this incredible insight today. He would say at dinner, "Diana's the only one in that office who actually understands macro." He never said it with malice. That was the thing. He said it the way people drop small bombs casually, without looking at what they've just destroyed. When Claire suggested she was thinking of going back to work, the firm had reached out. Harriet had a project that needed her eye. Marcus nodded with the tolerant patience of someone hearing a child describe a plan to build a rocket ship. "Sure," he said, "if that's what you want." The tone made it clear that what she wanted had approximately zero bearing on anything real. Then she got pregnant. They had talked about children. They both wanted them, or at least they had both said they wanted them. And there is sometimes a very large distance between those two things. When Claire held up the positive test, eyes bright with something that was joy and terror and wonder, all at once, Marcus had hugged her. He had said the right words. But there was something behind his eyes in that moment, a flicker, quick as a camera shutter, that she had felt without being able to name. The pregnancy changed the dynamic in ways she hadn't anticipated. She had expected warmth. She had expected warmth. She had expected partnership. What she got instead was a strange, subtle distancing. Like Marcus was slowly renegotiating the terms of their marriage in his own head without telling her. He worked more, he traveled more, he came home to find her asleep and left before she woke up. When she asked him about it, when she said quietly and clearly that she needed more from him, that she was scared and tired and carrying something enormous, and she needed a husband present. He looked at her with the expression of a man deeply burdened by the unreasonable expectations of the people around him. "I'm providing for our family," he said. "What exactly do you think is missing?" That was 6 months in. That was when the cracks became undeniable. She found out about Diana 3 weeks before Marcus walked out. She hadn't gone looking for it. That is important because some people will assume she must have been snooping, must have been paranoid, must have contributed to the climate of suspicion that produces discoveries like this one. She hadn't. She had been using his laptop to book a doctor's appointment because her own phone had died. And there it was, right there on the screen. He had left open an email thread that went back for months. Long and intimate and devastating, the kind of correspondence that leaves no room for alternative interpretation. She closed the laptop. She sat very still. Outside the window, the city continued its business, cars passing, someone's dog barking, a child laughing 3 floors down. The world had not stopped. Somehow, impossibly, the world had not stopped. She said nothing that night, or the next morning. She moved through those days like someone navigating very carefully around a live wire, taking quiet stock of everything. Thinking about the baby moving inside her, thinking about what she needed and what she deserved and what she was going to do. She was not a woman who reacted from panic. She was a woman who processed from the deep center of herself, slowly and completely. Like a stone-absorbing heat. That when Marcus came home that Tuesday in March, the one the story starts with, he was not coming home having been caught. He was coming home having made a decision. He walked in with the settled energy of someone who had already had the hard conversation with himself and was now simply delivering the verdict to someone who would have no say in it. "I think we should separate," he said. Not, "we should talk." Not, "I have something I need to tell you." Straight to the verdict. And Claire, who already knew, who had spent 3 days sitting with this exact moment, looked at him and said, "I know about Diana." There was a silence that, and in that silence, Marcus made his second enormous mistake. Because instead of feeling shame, instead of the devastation and contrition that a decent man would feel standing in front of his 6 months pregnant wife, having been discovered in exactly the position he deserved to be discovered in, instead of any of that, Marcus Hargrove felt relief. Because now he didn't have to explain himself. Now it was simple. He could reframe this as mutual. He could tell the story, going forward, as 2 people who had simply grown apart. A marriage that had run its course, 2 adults making a hard but rational decision together. He had been caught, and it had set him free. This was the particular privilege of a man who had never been truly accountable for anything. "Then you understand," he said. "Just that. I understand that you have been sleeping with someone else while I'm carrying your child," Claire said. Her voice was so calm, it was almost frightening. "Yes, I understand that. It's more complicated than don't," she said. "Please, don't explain it to me." There was a long silence. Then she said, "I want you to leave." And that is when Marcus said something that would turn out to be the most catastrophically miscalculated sentence of his entire life. He said, "Claire, what are you going to do? Be realistic. You haven't worked in 2 years. This house is in my name. Your health insurance is through my company. You are 6 months pregnant with no income, no job, no plan, and no real skills that translate into anything in the current market." He was building to something. His voice had taken on that tone, the one she recognized now. The professor addressing the confused student. He wasn't ending a marriage. He was dismissing an employee. "I'll make sure you're taken care of. You'll get a settlement, that's fair. But let's not pretend you have some kind of leverage here, because you don't. You're going to need my help. You're going to need my connections. You're going to need my money. So let's be adults about this." That was when Claire said it. Quietly. No drama. Just the simple, factual truth of what she believed about herself. "I'll be fine on my own," Marcus said. Marcus Hargrove threw his head back and laughed. He picked up his keys. He walked out the door. He drove to Diana's, and Claire Donovan stood, alone in the kitchen of a house that wasn't hers, her hand on her belly, the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, and she said, out loud, in the empty room, to herself and to her unborn daughter, "Watch me." The first week was the hardest. Not because of the grief, though. The grief was real, a physical thing, living in her chest like a stone. Not because of the fear, though the fear was loud, particularly at 3 in the morning when the house was dark and the future was enormous and unknowable. The hardest part of the first week was the phone call from Viviane. Viviane called on a Wednesday, 2 days after Marcus left, and she did not call to check on Claire or to express any form of maternal concern for the grandchild she was carrying. She called, in her perfectly modulated, supremely composed voice, to let Claire know that Marcus would be sending over a lawyer to discuss the divorce terms, and that given the circumstances, the family's expectation was that things would be resolved quickly and cleanly. I hope you understand, Vivian said, that we've retained representation. The most important thing now is protecting Marcus's interests, especially given everything he's built. And what about protecting the interests of his child? Claire asked. There was a brief pause. Of course Marcus will fulfill his financial obligations. We're not monsters. Claire, at a word, we said everything. They had already convened. They had already decided. They had already drafted the terms of her dismissal and were now simply waiting for her signature. She thanked Vivian for calling. She hung up. She sat down on the floor of the hallway, just sat down, because the floor was the nearest solid thing, and she breathed, long and slow and deliberate. And then she called her mother. Her mother drove from Columbus the next morning. She arrived with 2 suitcases and a pot of soup and the particular quiet fury of a woman who has raised a daughter she believes in absolutely and watched someone treat her daughter like she was disposable. She didn't say much. She unpacked her suitcase into the guest room. She reheated the soup. She sat across from Claire at the kitchen table and looked at her with eyes that said, I am here and I am not leaving and you are not alone. What do you need? Her mother asked. Claire wrapped both hands around her soup bowl and looked out the window. March light, bare trees, the city doing its business. I need to think, she said. I need to be very quiet and I need to think. Her mother nodded. Then we'll be quiet. What Claire was thinking about, what had been circling in her mind for the 3 days since she found those emails, for the weeks since she had sat on the floor of the hallway and breathed, was a problem she had been unable to stop thinking about for the better part of a year. It had started, as her best ideas always did, with her own frustration. During her pregnancy, she had been doing what pregnant women everywhere do, redesigning her home, or at least trying to, in preparation for the baby, and what she discovered over and over again, in store after store, catalog after catalog, was something that struck her as almost offensively absurd. The things designed for new parents were almost universally hideous, not in a minor way, not in a could use some improvement way, in an absolute, systemic, fundamental way. Baby furniture that would embarrass a dentist's waiting room from 1994, nursery decor that seemed designed by someone who had never actually looked at a baby, let alone a home, premium products that charged luxury prices for designs that looked like they had been conceived of entirely by algorithm, and the products aimed at mothers specifically, the nursing chairs and feeding accessories and pumping equipment, all designed with the aesthetic sensitivity of a piece of hospital equipment and the practicality of a product whose designers had clearly never actually used it. She had spent 6 months being unable to find a single nursing chair that was both genuinely comfortable for extended use and beautiful enough to exist in a thoughtfully designed room. Not one. She had spent 6 months unable to find a single baby monitor. That didn't look like a security camera from a parking garage. She had looked at every major baby products brand on the market, studied them the way she studied design in college, and she had arrived at a conclusion that felt both obvious and strange. Nobody was designing for the parent who cared about beauty. Nobody was designing for the person who had spent years cultivating an aesthetic life and now, at the most exhausted and emotionally overwhelming moment of their existence, was being asked to fill their home with objects that looked like they had been manufactured in a joyless factory by people who had never once stopped to ask, what would make this person feel good? The market was full of functional and full of safe and full of a cheap approximation of cute, but beautiful. Genuinely, honestly, functionally, and aesthetically beautiful. Products designed with the seriousness and care given to the best home goods or the best fashion or the best technology. Nothing. A vast, yawning gap in the market, right there in plain sight. And one of the most reliably large and consistent consumer categories that exists, because people will always have babies, in good economies and bad, in cities and suburbs, in every culture and every country. Shay had seen the gap. She had been living inside the gap, and until Marcus walked out that door with his keys and his certainty and his laugh, she had been waiting for someone else to fill it. There is a particular kind of anger that functions like rocket fuel, not the hot, blinding, uncontrollable kind, the cold kind, the clear kind, The kind that doesn't distort your thinking but focuses it, narrows it to a single bright point. Burns away everything except the essential truth of what you are capable of. That is what Marcus's laugh had given her. And sitting at that kitchen table with her mother across from her and her daughter moving gently inside her and the bare trees outside the window catching the thin March light, Claire felt it arrive clean and cold and absolute. She was going to build the company she had been waiting for someone else to build. She pulled her laptop toward her, and she began to write. She moved back to Columbus. It was a practical decision. Her mother was there, her father was there, her childhood bedroom was there, and the settlement from Marcus would cover her basic expenses for a year if she was careful, which she intended to be. She packed what was hers, which was not as much as she would have liked, and she drove the 4 hours south through flat Ohio farmland with her mother in the passenger seat and an entire company taking shape in her head with a clarity that was, under the circumstances, almost alarming. Her daughter, Nora, was born in June, 7 pounds, 2 ounces, with Claire's eyes and a very loud opinion about the world. Claire held her in the delivery room in the grey early morning light, her mother beside her having cried through approximately the entire last hour of labor, and she felt something enormous and simple and complete settle into place inside her, had everything she needed. She named the company Nora House. She spent the last 2 months of her pregnancy building the business plan, not a casual, preliminary one, a full, rigorous, detailed plan that laid out the brand identity, the target market, the initial product line, the supply chain requirements, the pricing architecture, the competitive landscape, the funding requirements, and the go-to-market strategy. She worked on it during the quiet middle of the night hours when she couldn't sleep, which in late pregnancy is most of them. She worked on it at her parents' kitchen table with her mother bringing her tea and her father asking the kind of small, loving questions that made her feel like herself. She worked on it the way she had worked on every design project that had ever mattered to her, with total, focused, disciplined love. The concept was clean and clear. Nora House would design and sell a curated collection of elevated, beautifully designed products for modern parents, the intersection of genuine aesthetic sophistication and genuine functional excellence. Products that a design-conscious parent would be proud to have in their home. Products that understood the user, exhausted, overwhelmed, deeply caring, unwilling to sacrifice either beauty or practicality, and designed for them rather than around them. Products that said, your taste matters and your comfort matters, and those two things do not have to be in conflict. The initial product line would center on the nursing chair, the one she had never been able to find, along with a complementary collection of nursery furniture and accessories, clean, architectural lines, materials chosen for both sustainability and sensory quality, colors that integrated seamlessly with adult living spaces, a design language that was warm and human and completely devoid of the saccharine, infantilizing aesthetic that dominated the entire baby products category, and at a price point that positioned it as premium but accessible, not a luxury toy for the ultra-wealthy, but a considered investment for the professional parent who cared about their environment. She knew, because she had studied the market, with the same thoroughness she had applied to every other aspect of the plan, that this was a genuine white space. She knew, because she had her own instincts and 11 years of professional design experience behind them, but the concept was right, and she knew, because the grief and the anger and the fuel of Marcus's laugh was still burning steady and cold somewhere under everything, that she was not going to stop. What she needed was money, that she had some, not enough. The divorce settlement had been, true to Vivian's word, fair in a narrower's, most technical sense of the term, calculated to fulfill Marcus's legal obligations, and nothing more. She had $40,000, a reliable car, and excellent credit. She needed $150,000 to prototype, manufacture a first run, build the website, and have enough runway to get to a first revenue event. She started with every small business grant she could find. She applied for 6. She got 2. She entered a regional entrepreneurship competition at the Columbus Chamber of Commerce and won the $25,000 first prize, standing at a podium with Nora and a baby carrier on her chest. Her presentation slides clean and beautiful and devastatingly well argued, the judges leaning slightly forward in their seats with the particular body language of people who have just encountered something they cannot dismiss. She got a small business loan for the remainder. She hired a manufacturer out of Vermont. She had found after 3 months of research a family-owned operation that had been making high-quality furniture for 40 years and had the craftsmanship and the flexibility of a company that cared about what it made. She oversaw every detail of the prototype process with the full force of her design expertise, rejecting 3 iterations before arriving at the nursing chair that made her sit down in it and close her eyes and know, with absolute certainty, that it was exactly right. She built the website herself, learning what she needed to learn, spending $57 on a Squarespace subscription and an entire week of late nights on tutorials, producing something clean and quiet and visually stunning that looked like it had been made by an expensive studio. Nora House launched online in October. 4 months after Nora was born, it sold out in 72 hours, not a modest, encouraging little sellout. A complete, total, website crashing, servers groaning, waitlist generating sellout. Because what Claire had not fully calculated or perhaps had understood intuitively, without quite naming it, was the size of the community of parents who had been waiting, with a frustration that had never had anywhere to go for exactly this product to exist. They found Nora House and they did not just buy from it. They advocated for it. They posted about it with the evangelical fervor of people who had been heard for the first time after years of being ignored. They tagged their friends. They wrote blog posts. They sent emails, actual personal emails to Claire's contact address saying things like, "I have been looking for this for 3 years and you have no idea how much I needed this to exist." She reordered. She expanded the line. She hired a part-time operations person, a young woman named Priya who was a business student at Ohio State and had emailed cold to ask if there were any openings, and whose email was so good that Claire called her within 20 minutes of reading it. She hired Harriet Osei's former business partner, a 60-year-old man named George, a Samoa who had more supply chain experience than anyone she had ever met, and who agreed to consult for equity because he said the company was the most exciting thing he'd seen in the category in 20 years. By December, 2 months after launch, Nora House had revenue of $800,000 and a wait list of 14,000. Customer Marcus did not know any of this was happening. He had moved in with Diana, which in the particular logic of men who believed they have traded up was a declaration of success. Diana had an apartment in River North, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a home office, and the kind of minimalist sophistication that read to Marcus as validation. He had made the right choice. He had chosen the right woman. He had chosen the life that matched his ambitions. He thought about Claire occasionally. In the abstract way one thinks about a chapter that has been closed. He sent the child support payments his lawyer had arranged, on time and without complaint, because that was how a man of his standing handled his obligations. He told people, when it came up, that the marriage had simply run its course to different people who had wanted different things. He was generous in his characterization. "She was sweet," he said, "just not really built for the pace of the life I live." His mother agreed. His friends agreed, because his friends were the kind of men who agreed with whatever position had already been decided. His world was comfortable and affirming and completely sealed. He did not follow Claire on social media. He had no reason to. She was in Columbus. She was managing. The lawyers handled everything. She was in the private geography of his attention. Simply gone. So Marcus did not see the New Year profile in the Columbus Dispatch. He did not see the piece in Fast Company in February, 6 months after launch, headlined "The Parent Who Designed Everything New Parents Actually Need." He did not see the feature in Architectural Digest in March, 12 months after launch, which described Nora House as the most significant new entrant in the home and family category in a decade, and included a photograph of Claire standing in her design studio, Nora on her hip, wearing a white linen shirt and looking, the writer noted, like someone who knows exactly where she's going. He did not see the Forbes article in April, but his mother did. Vivian Hargrove had a Monday morning ritual that she had maintained for 20 years. Coffee, the Financial Times, and then a 30-minute scroll through several business publications she considered worth her attention. Forbes was one of them. She read it on her iPad at the kitchen table of the Hargrove family home in Lake Forest, Illinois, and on a particular Monday morning in April, 14 months after Marcus had walked out of the marriage with his keys in his hand and a laugh on his lips, she put down her coffee cup and sat very still for a long time. The article was titled, "Nora House Raises $60 million Series B at $340 million valuation and its founder is just getting started." The photograph that accompanied the article was of Claire Donovan, standing in front of the Nora House headquarters, a converted warehouse in Columbus's Short North neighborhood. Beautiful and deliberate and completely, perfectly designed, wearing a charcoal blazer and holding her 80-month-old daughter on her hip. The daughter who had her father's jaw and her mother's eyes, and who was in the photograph, pointing at something off camera with an expression of such absolute determined purpose that the photo editor had clearly understood it would be the cover image before the shutter had finished clicking. The article described, in the efficient and admiring prose of a business publication that respects success on its own terms, the trajectory of Nora House from launch to the present moment. The October sellout, the December revenue, the January expansion into Canada, and the UK, the February hire of a former Dyson executive as chief product officer, the March partnership with a major retail chain that brought Nora House into 800 store locations, the April Series B funding round, led by one of the most respected consumer investment firms in the country, valuing the company at $340 million. The article quoted the lead investor, a man who had backed for Fortune 500 consumer brands in his career. Claire Donovan has done something that very rarely happens in any category. She identified a genuinely unmet need, designed a genuinely superior solution, and built a genuinely exceptional company around it. The trajectory is extraordinary. The product quality is extraordinary. And frankly, the founder is extraordinary. And at the very bottom of the article, in the kind of personal aside that Forbes writers occasionally allow themselves when the story is simply too good not to include it, Donovan, who began building Nora House while 6 months pregnant and newly separated, launching the company 4 months after giving birth, says she doesn't spend much time thinking about what motivated her in those early days. I had a very clear picture of what I wanted to build, she says, setting her daughter down on the floor of her office, watching as the toddler immediately makes for a shelf of prototype samples with her father's certainty and her mother's taste. I just needed someone to believe I couldn't do it. Vivian read the article twice, and she set her iPad face down on the table, which was something she had never done before in her life. And she sat and looked at the Winterberg garden through the kitchen window for a very long time. Then she called Marcus. Marcus did not believe it. But this is important to understand. His first response, his actual, honest, unguarded first response when his mother read him the headline, was not shame. It was not awe. It was not even curiosity. It was disbelief, in the most fundamental and revealing sense. It simply did not compute. The information did not fit the model he had built of Claire. And so his mind's first move, automatic as breathing, was to find a reason the information must be wrong. That can't be right, he said. You must have the wrong person, Marcus, his mother said, with a weight in her voice he had not heard before. I'm looking at a photograph of your daughter. Silence. Marcus, Vivian said again, and there was something in her voice now that was almost something he couldn't place. Something that sounded impossibly like embarrassment. I think you need to read this. He read it, standing in Diana's kitchen in River North, the morning light coming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, his coffee getting cold beside him. He read it once through, fast, the way you read something you're hoping will turn out to be less than it appeared. Then he read it again slowly, and by the time he reached the last paragraph, the one about needing someone to believe she couldn't do it, he was sitting down, though he had no memory of sitting down. He put his phone face down on the counter. Diana came into the kitchen in her work clothes, sharp and composed, and asked him what was wrong. Nothing, he said. Work thing. She accepted this and poured her coffee and talked about something, a meeting, a client, something, and he heard none of it, because somewhere behind the cool surface of his expression, something was happening to the architecture of Marcus Hargrove's self-image that he was not yet ready to look at directly. He picked up his phone again. He looked at the photograph, the converted warehouse with the beautiful sign, the charcoal blazer, the toddler pointing at the future. I just needed someone to believe I couldn't do it. He thought about his keys clicking on the marble counter. He thought about his laugh. He thought about you can barely keep a houseplant alive. He thought about you've never once in your life had an original idea that didn't come from a Pinterest board. He sat with those thoughts for a long time. And this is the moment where a genuinely changed man and a merely humiliated man diverge. Because they diverge here, and the divergence matters. Marcus did not feel sorrow. He did not feel genuine remorse. He felt something that was much more familiar to him, and much less impressive. He felt envy, and he felt the particular, clawing need of a man who has decided that something he dismissed is actually valuable to possess. He called his personal assistant. He asked her to find out who Claire's lawyer was. He called Claire's personal number that evening. She was in her office at the Nora House headquarters. When her phone rang with a number she recognized after a moment's pause, she looked at it. She set down the prototype she was reviewing. She let it ring 3 times. Then she answered. Marcus. Claire's voice had a register. She hadn't heard from him before, carefully modulated and slightly humbled, calculated to land in a specific place. She recognized it immediately, because she had 11 years of design experience and 18 months of a masterclass in this particular man. And she knew exactly what a carefully calibrated performance sounded like. I read the article. Which article, she said, not a question. Her voice entirely leveled. A brief pause. The Forbes piece. Ma'am Claire, I want to say that I am. He paused, and she could feel him selecting words the way a man picks a tool, not for what is true, but for what works. I'm proud of you. Genuinely, what you've built is Marcus, she said quietly, and that single word, the way she said it, stopped him completely. Yes. What do you want? Another pause. Longer. She waited. I was wondering if we could talk. In person. I'd like to see Nora, and I'd like to. He paused again. And this time what she heard in the pause was a specific, strangling sound of a man's ego fighting with his calculation. I think we made a mistake. I think I made a mistake, and I'd like to discuss. No, Claire said not just that. Claire, just hear me. No, Marcus, I heard you. For 3 years, I listened very carefully to everything you said to me, and I heard it completely. And I have thought about it a great deal. She paused. And when she continued, her voice was not angry, which was perhaps the most devastating thing of all. It was simply clear. The way a clean window is clear, so that you can see through it all the way. Nora has your visitation schedule, which I have honored every single time. That will not change. But you and I have nothing to discuss. Not about us. There is no us. There hasn't been. And frankly, there shouldn't have been for longer than it took me to understand that. Claire, I'm going to go back to my work now, she said. Have a good evening, Shanga. She set her phone face down on her desk. She looked at the prototype in front of her, a beautifully made, perfectly proportioned travel bassinet that would become one of Nora House's best-selling products, and she picked it up and turned it over in her hands, checking the joints, running her thumb along the seam of the fabric, doing the work. She was fine. She was completely, entirely, absolutely fine. The real reckoning came publicly, and it came in a way that nobody, including Claire, had engineered or orchestrated, which is perhaps the most perfect kind. It came in June, 18 months after Marcus walked out. Nora House had just been announced as one of the fastest-growing privately held companies in America. The announcement had generated substantial media attention, television segments, podcast appearances, an invitation to speak at a major design conference in San Francisco. Claire had accepted the conference invitation because she believed, with the conviction of someone who had learned it by living it, that visibility for a company this size was responsibility as much as opportunity. The conference was the Idiot Global Design Forum, and it drew an audience of investors, designers, executives, and industry leaders from across the world. Claire was the keynote speaker for the second day. She had spent 2 weeks preparing her talk, not about Nora House, specifically, but about what she had come to think of as the fundamental question of design. Who are you designing for? And do you actually believe that person deserves something beautiful? What she had not known, when she accepted the invitation, was that Marcus's firm, a mid-tier private equity company called Hargrove Capital, named with a particular set of men who put their own name on buildings, was one of the event's corporate sponsors, and that Marcus, in his capacity as a senior partner and as someone who had leaned aggressively into positioning himself as a forward-thinking consumer sector investor since the Forbes article had shown him, in very clear terms, exactly what forward-thinking consumer investing could look like, would be attending. He was in the audience when she walked out onto the stage. She did not know he was there. She learned later, from a friend who had been seated 2 rows behind him, that the color had left his face the moment she appeared. This woman he had once stood in a kitchen and laughed at, now walking out to a standing ovation in front of 800 of the most significant people in the design and business world, tall and composed and carrying herself with the specific confidence of someone who has earned every single thing she has, and knows it. Claire's talk was extraordinary, not in a performative way. She was not a flashy speaker, had no particular interest in performance, but in the way that entirely honest, deeply felt, completely articulate things are extraordinary. She talked about the design gap she had seen in the parent products market and why it had existed for so long, the unconscious bias, she argued, of an industry that had never truly respected the intelligence and taste of its core consumer base. She talked about what it meant to design for the most exhausted person in the room. She talked about the nursing chair that didn't exist and the choice she had made to make it exist. She talked about building a company with a newborn on her chest and $40,000 in a business plan drafted at 2 a.m. and the absolute, unshakable conviction that the thing she was building was real and right and necessary. Did not mention Marcus, who did not mention divorce, or betrayal, or a laugh in a kitchen in March. She didn't need to. The story was in the room. She closed her talk with the line she had come to think of as her guiding principle, the one she had written in the margin of her first business plan notebook. The best design answer to someone telling you that you can't is a thing you build. The audience rose to its feet. She stood at the podium for a moment, in the noise and the light, her eyes moving across the room, and she found him, not looking for him, simply finding him, the way you find a thing that occupies a particular place in your landscape whether you want it to or not. He was standing, he was clapping, and she could not have told you what expression was on his face because she had already moved her eyes on to the rest of the room, to the 800 people who had come to hear ideas that mattered, and she was smiling at all of them with a warmth that was real and whole and entirely hers. After the talk there was a reception. An investment firm partner asked to be introduced to her team. A journalist from the New York Times asked for an interview. A woman from the audience, early 30s, visibly pregnant, clutching her conference badge with both hands, pushed through the crowd to reach her and said, eyes bright, voice breaking slightly, "I bought your chair when I was pregnant last year, and I just want you to know it's the place I go when I need to feel okay. I don't know if that makes sense, but your company made a very hard year feel less hard, and I just needed to tell you that." Claire took her hands. "It makes complete sense," she said. "That is exactly what we are trying to do." Marcus found her as the room was beginning to thin. He had waited. She gave him that. In the account she gave her mother later, he had waited until the crowd around her had cleared, had not pushed through to her, had stood at a respectful distance until there was an appropriate moment. She noticed him approaching and felt nothing dramatic. No fear, no rage, no thrill of triumph. Just the calm, practical readiness of someone who had already decided exactly where the boundaries were and intended to honor them. Claire, he was not the same. She noticed that. The confidence was still there in the way he held himself, but something underneath it had shifted, like a building that looks the same from the outside but has had its foundation quietly renegotiated. That was, I don't have adequate words for that. "Thank you," she said simply. He looked at her for a moment, and she could see him wrestling with himself, with the gap between the story he had told for 18 months and the reality standing in front of him now. "I owe you an apology," he said finally. "A real one. Not because of," he gestured vaguely, meaning the conference, the applause, the article in Forbes, all of it. "Not because of this, but because of how I left. What I said. The way he stopped. Swallowed. I was wrong." Claire looked at him for a moment. She was not unmoved by the apology. She was a person of genuine warmth, and she recognized genuine difficulty when she encountered it, even in him. But she also understood, with the clarity that 18 months of building something real had given her, the difference between what she needed and what he was offering. "Marcus Hussein, I know, and I forgive you." He looked up, slightly startled, not by the forgiveness, she thought, but by how easily it had been given, and by what else was not in it, the need, the longing for something from him, the invitation for anything more. "But I want you to understand something," she continued. "I forgive you because I don't need to carry it anymore. Not because we have anything unfinished. We don't. Nora is lucky to have a father who shows up for his scheduled time, and I hope you continue to be that, because she deserves it. But this," she meant whatever he had come to propose or reclaim or revisit, "this is done." She smiled. A cold smile, or a victorious one. A genuine, free, complete smile. "Thank you for coming tonight," she said. "Take care of yourself, Marcus." She turned and walked back to her team, who were clustered near the bar with the energized, slightly dazed expressions of people who have just watched their company's founder deliver the best speech of her life, and are still processing it. Priya had a glass of champagne waiting. George was making a point about the distribution deal in animated terms to the investment partner. 2 new engineers from their product team were laughing about something, the easy laughter of people who are doing exactly the work they are supposed to be doing in exactly the place They are supposed to be doing it. Marcus stood alone on the other side of the room and watched her for a moment, laughing with her team, accepting the champagne, tilting her head at something George was saying and then nodding with the decisive, definitive nod of someone who knows exactly what she thinks and says so, and then he turned and walked out of the room. 3 months later, in September, Nora House was named to the Inc. 5000 list of the fastest growing private companies in America, ranking the following February. 23 months after launch, the company crossed $500 million in annualized revenue and officially qualified for consideration on the Fortune 500. The formal designation came in the spring. In a press release that began, Nora House, the design-forward parent products company founded by Claire Donovan in Columbus, Ohio. Claire read it sitting at her kitchen table at her house in the short north. Her house, her name, her deed, with Nora at her feet working with intense concentration on a set of wooden blocks, and a cup of coffee going cold beside her because she kept forgetting to drink it. Her mother was in the kitchen making breakfast. Her father had driven up the night before and was somewhere in the backyard with the particular, purposeful happiness of a man who has just been told he can stay as long as he likes. She read the press release all the way through, carefully, and then she set her laptop aside and picked up her daughter and held her. Nora tolerated this for approximately 4 seconds before squirming back toward the blocks with the extremely clear priorities of a 2-year-old who has important structural work to complete. Claire sat on the floor next to her and watched her builda tower, first 3 blocks stacked with the earnest concentration of someone who is still discovering the physics of the situation. It wobbled. It held. Nora looked up at her mother and grinned with her entire face, the wide-open total joyful grin of a person who has not yet learned to modulate their happiness for an audience. Very good, Claire said. That's very good. And then she picked up a block and handed it to her daughter, and the tower went higher. There is a thing people often say about stories like this one, a comfortable, tidy thing, that it must have been easy for her, that she must have had something special, some secret advantage, some quality that most people don't have, because otherwise how do you explain it? How do you go from standing alone in a kitchen at 6 months pregnant to founding a Fortune 500 company in 18 months? The people who say this have not been paying attention. What Claire Donovan had was not a secret or a special gift or a divine inheritance. She had 11 years of professional expertise that she had earned with diligence and discipline and love. She had the ability to see a problem that everyone else had looked directly at without recognizing it. She had the courage to act when action was terrifying, not in the absence of fear, but straight through the middle of it. She had her mother driving from Columbus with 2 suitcases and a pot of soup. She had Priya's cold email and George's supply chain experience and the Vermont manufacturer who cared about what he made. She had 14,000 people on a wait list who had been waiting for exactly this thing to exist. She had the particular clarifying cold-burning fuel of being told, with total certainty, by someone who should have known better, that she was nothing. She had Nora, and she had that moment in the kitchen, alone, her hand on her belly, the clock, ticking, the bare trees outside, the enormous and unknowable future ahead of her, and the quiet, unshakable, bone-deep promise she had made to herself, and to her daughter. Watch me, so this is not a story about a woman who was extraordinary in some prior installed, prepackaged, innate way. This is a story about what happens when someone takes the worst moment of their life and decides, not in spite of it but because of it, to build something real. This is a story about the things we carry in us that we don't know are there until the pressure is high enough to reveal them. This is a story about the fact that the people who laugh at you, who look at you in your most vulnerable moment and decide you are small and containable and safe, to dismiss those people sometimes, do you the greatest favor that can be done, because they light a fire that runs on an entirely different fuel than admiration does. It runs on proof, the kind you build with your hands, 1 block at a time, until the tower is high enough that there's no way left to pretend it isn't there. Marcus Hargrove is still at his firm. He is still successful, in the ordinary, adequate, conventional sense, of a man who has always been given things and has managed those things reasonably well. He sees Nora on his scheduled weekends, and he is, by all accounts, genuinely good to her during those hours, which is the most important thing about him as far as Claire is concerned, and the only thing about him that she still thinks about it. Diana has a new boyfriend, Vivian Hargrove. It is reported by those who know her, keeps a copy of the Forbes article in the drawer of the table by her reading chair. Nobody knows why. She has never explained it. Perhaps she is proud, in the complicated, uncomfortable way of someone who has been shown the size of their mistake. Perhaps she keeps it as a reminder. Perhaps she is simply, at last, paying attention. Claire wakes up in the morning in a house in the short north, and she drinks her coffee and she reads her emails and she goes to her office and she does the work. Sometimes Nora comes with her and commandeers a corner of the design studio for her wooden blocks and her absolutely authoritative opinions about color. Sometimes Claire's mother comes for the week and they have dinner at the kitchen table the way they did when Claire was young, with good food and easy conversation and the deep, unhurried warmth of two women who know exactly how much they mean to each other. On the wall of Claire's office, in a simple frame above her desk, is a piece of paper on which she wrote, in the first week after Marcus left, at 2 a.m. at her parents' kitchen table in Columbus, the first line of the business plan that would become Nora House. It says only, the best design answer to someone telling you that you can't is the thing you build. The thing is built. She is fine. She is more than fine. She is exactly who she always was. Who she was before he ever walked into that client dinner with his practiced confidence and his charming certainty. Who she was before 2 years of small corrections and dismissals and the steady, dripping erosion of a marriage that was never actually built on the right foundation. She is the woman her mother raised, and her father's artistic eye, and Harriet Osei's discipline, and 11 years of learning to translate what a person needs into something beautiful and real. She is Claire Donovan, founder and CEO of Nora House, mother of Nora, and the person who heard someone laugh at her in a kitchen and decided, quietly and completely and without a single moment of doubt, that the laugh was not the last word. The last word was always going to be hers, and she had not yet finished speaking.